Welcome to Hope on Fire, relevant talk radio for young adults. Whether you're 25 or 45, there's bound to be a discussion that you care about. Our mission is to share practical ways to find God in your everyday life. And now today's host, Chris Lang.
According to the Guttmacher Institute, more than 200 million pregnancies occurred worldwide in 2008. Yes, you heard that right. That's 200 million. Out of those 200 million pregnancies, more than one-third, or about 74 million pregnancies, were unwanted. About half of those pregnancies went full term to delivery, and the other half ended in abortions. Today's program is about the babies that go full term to delivery. Where will that 30-plus million babies go? And how will they live? What sort of learning or health disabilities will they be able to survive? Will they have a chance to learn that someone loves them and, yes, wants them? Hello, my name is Chris Lang, and today's topic is abandoned once, adopted twice. I want to introduce you to one encouraging story out of the staggering millions of unwanted pregnancies. This story joins us today by studio cam from his home in Nashville, Tennessee, and his name is Kim Deardorff. Kim is a producer and a composer, a musician. He's worked with large film and music production companies. He's even been kind enough to work on some of my own album projects. He recently became an inspirational speaker, telling his story for crowds of more than 15,000 people at a time. Hi, Kim, and welcome to Hope on Fire today.
Hi, Chris. Good to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, it's just it's awesome to be able to share your story with the world, Kim. So tell everybody how your life all started and what happened to you way back at the beginning.
Yeah, exactly. First, I just want to start out by saying that anything that I say today is about the power and the grace and the love of God, and everything that's happened in my life I attribute to God's love, and I feel like everyone could have the same type of relationship with the Lord. I was born in 1964 in Seoul, South Korea, and don't really know exactly what the reason was that my parents decided to give me up, but they ended up throwing me away, and I was found in the garbage when I was just a few days old. I was taken to an orphanage in Seoul, South Korea in 1964. And the orphanage was started by a couple from Oregon. The names were Mr. and Mrs. Holt. And they'd seen movies of little abandoned Korean children wandering the streets of Korea. And the Lord laid upon their heart a desire to not only help these children, but to adopt 8 of their own. And they started this orphanage in the late 50s. They got a special bill passed through Congress within 1 month, which is, I think we all would recognize would be a miracle.
Wow, that's amazing.
I was taken to this orphanage. I was a few days old. I spent the first 4 months of my life there. They actually thought I might end up being blind. I had something wrong with my eyes. I ended up spending the first 3 weeks of my life in a hospital. And after 4 months, I was adopted by an American couple from Michigan. They had seen my little picture in an adoption book, and they decided that I was going to be one of their children, along with another a Korean girl that became my sister, and her name was Kathy, and she was 23 months old. And an amazing thing happened when my parents decided to fly to Korea to pick me and my sister up. NBC News was shooting a film about the Holts and about the work that they were doing with orphan and abandoned Korean children. and they just happened to be shooting that film on my parents' trip to Korea. And so I have all this on film. And tragically, during the week of shooting the life of Harry Holt and the orphanage, he ends up dying of a heart attack. And me and my family are shown at his funeral, and one of the last people to see him alive. Um, I tracked down this footage 27 years later. My mom actually sent it to me, and I edited it. The film was originally 50 minutes long, and I edited it down to 3.5 minutes, and I put a little music score behind it, and I put it up on YouTube, and I started getting people writing to me from all over the world, and it kind of inspired me, or God kind of started showing me that He wanted me to share my story with others.
So, Kim, you almost died. You got thrown away, and then you got adopted, and you grew up in an American over in the United States. I noticed that that you've mentioned before that you were saved twice. Before we get into your sort of faith journey, tell everyone what it was like growing up in an American household. You obviously you were born in Korea, and you spent all of your childhood with an American family. What was it like for you having brothers and sisters that didn't look like you?
Well, actually, it was really tough. Actually, my parents didn't hide the fact that I was adopted, and they didn't hide the fact that I was found in the garbage, and to some degree, I think that I didn't mind. I didn't mind knowing where I came from. It gave me a sense of God's hand over my life and God protecting my life. I grew up on a little small farm in kind of the middle of nowhere in Michigan, a little town called Edmore, Michigan, with my sister. And I didn't really see another Korean person at my school or in town until I was in high school. So when I was growing up, it was either really cool to be different and be a foreigner, or wasn't cool, and most of the time it wasn't. I would say that I got picked on quite a bit of the time. I just it was okay. I mean, I didn't mind being me. I knew that's who God made me to be, and I actually didn't mind being a little different.
Now, when did you know that you had a gift for music, Kim? When did during your childhood, when did you actually start learning what some of the gifts God gave you?
We didn't have a radio. We kind of grew up in a little bit of isolation from the outside world with the way we were raised in church. We didn't really have exposure to a lot of media, but we did have some records, some gospel records, and I started playing piano. I started playing melodies off records when I was 3. And I started just on my own. I would hit these notes. I would hit the notes on the piano, and they were so intriguing to me. I just loved to hear the sound. We had a piano that was from made in 1900, and so it wasn't really a great piano, but I didn't really know the difference. And I started writing when I was like 5 or 6, and
you just started playing by ear. You just started playing stuff that you were listening to on a record?
Yeah, it was very spontaneous. Like I said, we didn't have a lot of other things in the home as entertainment, and I just gravitated towards the piano for some reason. And when I was growing up, I just assumed that everybody heard music in their head, and later I found out that they didn't. I took a few years of lessons when I was when I was growing up, I didn't really like lessons. I didn't like practicing. I I actually had a hard time reading the notes. They seemed to like move around on the page, and I couldn't really follow them very closely. And frankly, I didn't really like the music that I was given. So most of what I've learned, I kind of learned on my own and just by listening and by playing and experimenting. And I would spend hours in my room um, just finding notes and finding chords and trying to find the music that I was hearing in my head.
What would you say to someone who's listening today who is in an orphanage, Kim, or who grew up without a family? How is it that you found your belief that you have a Father in heaven who's known you for eternity and who has never abandoned you? This is hard.
Well, I know my
Isn't this
I know
hard?
my situation's a little bit different, but ever since I was aware of the fact that I was found in the garbage, I had an overwhelming sense that there was a God in heaven. I had an overwhelming um, feeling that God had His hand on my life, and even though my childhood wasn't always easy, uh, and we had my parents, they made the decision to adopt us. We had some really great times, and we had some very challenging times in our home. Um, my parents ended up getting a divorce when I was 14, and ended up kind of almost not homeless, but not really, wanted by either the parents at that time. Um, I just gravitated towards the knowledge that God had saved me from the garbage, and that He knew who I was. He knew what my name was. He knew all the challenges and all the difficulties that I had growing up. And despite anything that was going on in my life, God was the only constant. God was the constant. He was the one that I could always turn to, and I think I found an avenue to God through music as well.
Well, that's awesome, Kim. While we're getting ready to go to break, why don't you take us to your studio with your baby grand in it? And when we come back from the break, I'm sure everybody would love to hear you play some music for us. So while we're getting ready to go to break, why don't you take us down the hall to your studio?
All right, I'm going.
All right, buddy. All right, everyone. We are here talking with Kim Deardorff, and I hope you all will stay with us as we continue on this topic, abandoned once, adopted twice. This is Hope on Fire, relevant talk radio for young adults. Welcome back to Hope on Fire, relevant talk radio for young adults. I'm Chris Lang, and I'm here with my friend today, Kim Deardorff, who's joining us from his studio in Nashville, Tennessee. Welcome back, Kim. That's nice, brother. Now you practice a lot, don't you?
Well, I put in quite a bit of time. Like I said, when I was a little kid, if there was ever a place that we would go and visit, or an event, if there was a church or whatever, if there was a piano nearby, I certainly would spend most of my time near or at the piano. And I must say that um, I had a couple people throughout my life that really helped encourage me and inspired me to continue with music, because since I'm mostly self-taught, um, sometimes there can be a tendency to get discouraged when you're around other people that are like you know, have degrees. But you know, God's given me this music. He's given me a voice through music, and I'm just happy that I can share it.
Well, that's awesome, Kim. Tell us, tell everybody, how it was that you took your talent and you started developing not just ability to produce and record music, but you also have become an expert in video and music production, and you've worked with some pretty famous people. God's put you in the paths of some pretty famous people. I mean, how has that impacted your life, would you say, in your faith journey?
Very profoundly, actually. Since I knew I loved music, and I didn't really have a straight avenue towards music through the traditional education system, and so God's led me in other directions. I spent 5 years in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. Actually, Keene. I worked at Keene, Texas, at the Adventist College there. I spent 5 years in Southern California working at the Adventist Media Center in Thousand Oaks, California, as the assistant audio director. And I spent 5 years in Orlando, Florida, as the head sound design engineer at one of the top audio and video firms in Orlando, Florida. And I would have to say that through all those experiences, the number one thing I could always rely on is God giving me knowledge, giving me confidence when I didn't really have a lot of confidence. There were a lot of opportunities. My first project I spent 1 week learning a software recording program in LA, and my first project was a $5 million animated film. I've had a chance to work with companies like the Dallas Cowboys, Val South, Del Taco when I lived in Texas. I moved out to California, and I worked at the Media Center, had a chance to write and compose the theme music for the first ever televised General Conference in Utrecht, Holland. Also was hired to work at the Toronto General Conference. And when I moved to Orlando, Florida, I kind of stepped into the commercial world, and God allowed me to be successful and gave me lots of opportunities. My first project was a 30-second, $1 million commercial for Walt Disney World Tower of Terror, and I ended up working on over 100 video and TV projects for Walt Disney, as well as Universal Studios and Nissan, and I had the privilege of doing the sound work for 3 of the exhibits and 2 of the films at the Kennedy Space Center.
Well, Kim,
it's just been awesome to see how God can interact with a life that's willing to let Him have control.
Tell our viewers and our audience, Kim, what Holt International, you mentioned, has been around for 50 years now, and they have an adoption program and they have a sponsorship program. Tell everybody how they can get involved if they're trying to adopt a child, if they're thinking about adopting, or if maybe they just want to help some orphans in the world. How could they connect with Holt International, and what can they do to get involved?
Well, the easiest way is to go to their website at holtinternational.org. It's HOLT.
And we'll list.
It's been around since the late 50s. They're actually the largest international adoption agency in the world now. and they're in over 15 countries. They have a sponsorship program where you can sponsor children while they're going through the process of being adopted. And over this last year, I had the privilege of speaking on their behalf. I did a conference in Gatlinburg, Tennessee, and I got to share part of my story on behalf of Holt International. And I was invited to travel to 73 cities over the next 6.5 months. I got to share my story to over 400,000 people and help raise over 5,000 new sponsorships. I got to travel with some of the most well-known Christian artists such as Toby Mac, New Song, Brandon Heath, Russia Fools, Francesca Battistelli, and a whole bunch of others. I got an amazing, enriching and life-changing experience while I was representing the organization that I was taken to when I was found over 45 years ago.
Now, Kim,
I think it was a miracle.
Kim, you mentioned that weren't you one of the first Korean babies that were adopted through the Holt International program?
I wasn't the first, but I mean I was in the early stages of the program. They started it in 1957. I didn't come along till 1964, but my picture says I think 4603, so I think that was my number. But again, they shot that film during the last week of Harry Holt's life, so I had the unique privilege of attending his funeral.
So 400,000 young adults, teenagers heard your story. How life-changing was that for you to be able to be here, still a young adult, and being able to tell literally 500,000 people what God did to save your life? How did that change your life? That was huge, wasn't it?
Well, it's an experience I'll never forget. I got to meet hundreds and hundreds of adopted children. I got to hear their stories. And I think the one thing that I came away with most was they said that some of them came up to me and they said, we didn't really feel like God had a purpose for my life. I got to hear your story, and now I feel that God does have a purpose for my life. And my motto to my story and my theme to my story is, number one, that it doesn't matter where or how you start out in life, that God has a purpose and a plan for everyone. And number two, that you find your true identity in the love of Christ and the salvation of Christ and in the love of God.
Kim, you have a favorite passage in the book of Psalms. Would you share that with our audience? And then I'd like to hear you play here before the end of the program.
Yeah, Psalms 27:10. It says, it speaks to me especially. It says, if your father and a mother abandon you, the Lord will take you in. And when I read that verse and passage, it just really hit home for me.
And that's where
not only me, but God wants to adopt everybody, every living person, every created human being on this earth. He wants to adopt, and He wants to be able to have a relationship with every person that He's created.
So that's Psalms. What's that passage again?
Psalms 27:10.
Okay, and that
11.
That means that you've been adopted twice, isn't it?
It does, and at the end of my little film, it says I've been saved twice.
Amen. Well, Kim, we just have a minute or so left. I'd love to hear you play a little bit more before we say goodbye today.
Okay, Chris. Okay, this is a song that I really like. It's called "The Love of God," and I'll just play until I guess we end here.
Got about a minute. No matter how many self-help books hit the bestseller list, any reasonable person can look around and see that society is in pretty rough shape. But the Bible challenges us to do more than just look around. It shows us what pure religion looks like. In James chapter 1, verse 27, the Bible says, "Pure and undefiled religion in the sight of God is this, to go visit orphans and widows in distress, and to keep oneself unstained from the world." God bless you.
Hope on Fire is produced by Livestreams Media, a listener-supported ministry. To download a free copy of today's program or be a part of our social network, please visit our website at hopeonfire.org. You may also contact us by writing to Livestreams Media, P.O. Box 608513, Orlando, Florida 32860, or online at hopeonfire.org. Thank you so much for your letters and continued support. Until next time, may God set your hope on fire.